What's up, soldiers? Thanks for joining me on today's video where we're talking programming for strength, specifically the linear periodization model. Now, when you are trying to get bigger, stronger, or more athletic and powerful, following a program is your best method for success. You cannot just go into the gym and do whatever you want and expect to get great results, right? So there's going to be a couple other videos out there in this series where we'll talk about different programming forms and models, but this is all linear periodization. So before we dive in, please do me a favor, click the like button and hit subscribe to the channel to get more content on strongman and all things getting swole in the mind, body, and soul. So linear periodization is probably the most common type of program that most gym goers use because it is simple in nature and it also just works, right? So what is it? It's a model where we increase your intensity and decrease your volume over time. Now, this is pretty effective because when we take a look at, our goals as athletes, in some form, we need an element of adding muscle mass. We need to add an element of power and speed, and then we also need to add an element of strength. So when we look at like a linear periodization type program, it's typically broken into phases. This would kind of be an example of a 12-week program where you would have 3 4-week blocks where your first one, you'd have a hypertrophy phase where most of your work is centered around 8 to 12 reps just to get bigger muscles. When our muscles are bigger, we're able to get more power and strength out of them. So we start there at a high volume and lower intensity. But then again, this goes up, this goes down. So then we get into a power phase where we're trying to work on things like force production, speed, and refine our technique in some of these compound technical lifts. That looks like 4 to 6 reps for the bulk of our work. And then finally, for our last cycle is where we go into our strength and peak phase. So we do this in this order because we're capitalizing on getting bigger, getting more powerful, and then we use the bigger and more powerful stimuluses to push us into stronger and heavier weights. So this is really nice because it's a nice, steady, gradual progression and it allows us to really put a lot of focus on one goal and one element at a time, okay? There's a lot of benefits to linear periodization, including it's simple, right? It's very easy to follow, especially when we're in these blocks themselves. We're not seeing a lot of changes other than just some weight increases or, rep changes a little bit, just a little bit. But you're following a system and style that is going to allow refining technique and allow you to really focus in on whatever it is you're going to do, right? It's just kind of like practicing the focus. If it's in your hypertrophy block, you're practicing hypertrophy, you're practicing power training, and then leading into the strength and peak, right? So that's where we get these targeted adaptations. We put our focus into one thing at a time. Now, with this structure, there's not a lot of change, so it promotes consistency in your training. You know what to expect, and you know how to approach the goal and the session that you are doing for that day, okay? It's very easy advances. When we structure this right, we're not making huge jumps week in and week out. It's a very steady percentage increase through these 12 weeks, right? And again, it's a very steady decrease in volume through this thing. So what's really nice about that is, it handles life stressors really well. If you're running programs that require you to be at 100% all the time, you're not going to be able to go in and hit those numbers every single day. But when you have these longer linear periodization models, you're only taking 1 or 2 steps forward or a small percentage jump forward at a time. So you're going to be able to reasonably handle step by step, week by week, workout by workout increases. Even if you undersleep, you're not the best fed that day, you're tired, you only have a little bit more to reach forward. So these kind of jumps are always within your reach. It's easy advances. Now, this is also, because of all this, very effective in the long term. Not only are these typically like a 12-week program where we get a lot of success there, but they can be run and repeated over and over and over again. In fact, some of the most common and popular methods and models, including like starting strength, Texas method, 5x5, 5-3-1, you can run through a full program and just reset, start it right over at a higher baseline and keep going, right? So it's really a nice thing to follow with this consistency and just allows to repeat over and over to keep getting gains. If it's broke, don't fix it. If you're having success, you can just do the same thing again, right? It's predictable. Same with consistency and being repeatable. Because it is predictable, you're going to have a better time showing up and applying yourself to what the exercise and the workout is. There's not a lot of guesswork. You're doing a lot of the same patterns over and over again. So you know what to expect and how to apply yourself for every single lift and session. Now, probably the biggest benefit for linear periodization is it's really the best way, in my opinion, for beginners and intermediates. And that's because the simplicity of the structure is going to allow somebody to really refine their technique over weeks, months, and potentially years to become technically proficient in order to advance onto harder programs, more challenging variations, and more complex movements and things like strongman, right? Like this all lays the groundwork by getting a lot of practice in your form and technique at different intensities and volumes to go into higher advanced levels, right? So there are a few limits to this though. It's not perfect, mostly being your blocks tend to be rigid, right? Like they don't allow for a ton of flexibility because we have this program to follow. We need to repeat these patterns for a certain amount of time in order to get the benefit of the adaptations. So there's just some this and that. Like it doesn't make sense to, just out of nowhere, throw in a new accessory movement to improve your floor speed on the deadlift or attack a weak point, because that's changing the focus of repeating patterns that we need to do in each phase. So there's a little bit of rigidity there, but if you're running through these programs over time, the next block you can include that, weak pointer accessory in, or the next full program you can put a focus in on that, but only after you are staying with the pattern and the program you're currently on. Some more advanced models like daily undulating periodization or conjugate model, which we'll get into in a later video, you can throw things in like, oh, I need to attack the lockouts on my deadlifts now. Then the next week you can work something in to do that, and it still fits with the model and the program. Okay. Now there are also the potential for plateaus on this. The body does adapt to the stimulus that you provided. So while for beginners and intermediates, you can run this for a long, long time, years at a time. In fact, at some point, your body is going to adapt to these stimuluses and it's going to be diminishing returns. So that's when you need to look ahead and consider, all right, well, now it's a good thing. Now I am, past intermediate or at the upper end of that. So I need to look into more advanced training methods and options and accessories in order to get better. So just remember that if you're plateauing, just be analytical and figure out what your next step is. It might be a complete break from this type of thing that's worked for you for potentially several years. Okay, don't be afraid to change it up if you need to. Lastly, some people say it is boring. To a point, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Got to find some excitement maybe in the numbers and the gains. As with anything else, love the process, not the outcome. Enjoy the process. But boring is not bad. Some people do very, very well with something that is very predictable, very consistent, that they can just show up, put in the work, not think about it, and move on. So that's what some people say about this, but it all depends on how you look at it and what you need as the individual. So some common examples of a linear periodization model are, the starting strength method, and then their intermediate program is the Texas method. It's all this same thing where we increase our intensity and decrease our volume over long periods of time, right? That's the same with 5x5 strong lifts and 5-3-1. So a little more on 5-3-1. Again, we're working across different rep ranges here. So 1 week we would do all 5s for our compound lifts. The following week, all 3s. The following week, all 1s. And then we'd have a deload, reset at a slightly higher baseline. So while this type of phase, we might have a 4-week, 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 linear periodization can also happen over a month and like 4 weeks. So again, it'd be week 1, week 2, week 3, deload, repeat, a little higher. Week 1, week 2, week 3, deload, bump your weights up a little more. So you could run this for a good while as well, depending on where you start and how correctly you approach it. So just a visualization here. This is what I've been talking about. Start here, intensity up and volume down. So there's a couple examples of these programs that are in the deadlift domination course on Club Strongman, or also in the deadlift domination ebook itself. So if you're interested in some of these programs, I'm going to be releasing a handful more soon, and I'll also be breaking down in the next couple of videos the other different types of common ways to program for strength, including daily undulating periodization and the conjugate method. So as always, thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to drop them in the comments below. Stay strong and have a championship day.